Those plans aren't for you, Thomas. My wife Diana's laugh echoed through our kitchen, while her mother Patricia smirked from across the table. I stood there holding a coffee mug, staring at vacation brochures spread across the surface I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. The glossy images of Florida beaches mocked me. I'd asked a simple question about the travel dates, thinking maybe I'd misheard their conversation. Instead, Diana dismissed me like I was interrupting adult business. Her mother didn't even look up from her phone, just sipped her tea with that satisfied expression I'd learned to recognize over 22 years of marriage. This wasn't about forgetting to mention something. This was deliberate exclusion, and they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The morning sunlight streaming through the window felt suddenly cold against my skin. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but our front door opened. Footsteps approached. Our son Marcus walked into the kitchen, basketball under his arm, completely unaware he was about to step into something that would change everything. My name is Thomas Wright. I'm 51 years old, originally from Portland, Oregon. If you want to hear more stories about how ordinary people stand up for themselves when pushed too far, please subscribe to this channel. You won't regret it. Marcus dropped his basketball by the door and headed straight for the refrigerator. Hey, Dad. Hey, Mom. Hey, Grandma. Just grabbing water before practice. He pulled out a bottle and turned toward us, finally noticing the tension in the room. Oh, are you guys talking about the Florida place? Mom, did you tell Dad about the timeline yet? The kitchen went completely silent. Diana's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Patricia's eyes snapped up from her phone, calculating. I stood very still, watching my wife's face cycle through surprise, panic, and then forced casualness in about 3 seconds. Marcus, honey, we were just discussing some preliminary ideas. Diana said quickly, her voice higher than normal. Nothing's finalized. But Marcus, bless his honest heart, kept talking while gulping his water. But Grandma said everything was already set for next month. She said the movers were coming on the 15th. The brochures on the table suddenly made terrible sense. These weren't vacation plans. This was something much bigger, much more permanent, and I'd been deliberately kept in the dark. That night, after Marcus left for his friend's house and Diana retreated to her home office for a suspiciously long phone call, Patricia cornered me in the hallway outside our bedroom. She'd been staying with us for 6 months, supposedly helping Diana with some family business matters I was never quite briefed on. Now she stood between me and my own bedroom door, arms crossed, wearing that expression of barely concealed contempt I'd endured for over 2 decades. You were never meant to stay, Thomas, she said quietly, her voice low enough that Diana wouldn't hear from downstairs. Diana was always going to outgrow this phase. Outgrow you? The smart thing would be to accept that gracefully. I stared at her, my heart pounding against my ribs. This wasn't anger speaking. This was cold, calculated truth from someone who'd been planning something for a very long time. She moved past me down the hallway, leaving me standing there alone. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. Then I sat on the edge of the bed Diana and I had shared for 22 years, and I tried to remember. There'd been papers years ago, insurance updates or retirement things. I'd signed them because Diana asked. Had I even read them properly? The next morning, I drove to our storage unit across town. Diana thought I was going to a hardware store for supplies for the garage shelves I'd been promising to build. Instead, I spent 3 hours in a dusty 10x10 space surrounded by boxes we accumulated over 2 decades. I found our old files in plastic containers near the back, organized by year. I started pulling folders, looking for anything financial, anything legal, insurance policy updates from 5 years ago, with my signature authorizing changes I couldn't remember discussing, retirement account beneficiary modifications from 3 years ago, redirecting my contributions in ways that seemed strange now that I actually read the fine print, trust acknowledgments, property agreements, medical power of attorney forms. Everything looked legitimate on the surface. Everything had my signature. But the more I read, the more I noticed small things that felt wrong. Dates that didn't match my memory. Decisions I didn't recall making. Then I found the investment reallocation from 2 years ago, a thick document with multiple signature pages. I flipped through it slowly. Page 7 was supposed to have my initials. The spot was blank. I started noticing things I'd been too comfortable to see before. 6 months ago, Diana had suggested I move my things to the guest room because of my snoring. I'd agreed, thinking it was temporary, a way for her to get better sleep. But I'd never moved back. My clothes stayed in that smaller closet. My books stayed on those shelves. My reading chair stayed by that window instead of in our bedroom where it had lived for 18 years. At family dinners, Diana and Patricia discussed financial decisions without asking my input, then changed the subject when I tried to contribute. At social gatherings with Diana's friends, I was introduced almost apologetically, like an accessory that came with the package but wasn't particularly valued. When had I become a guest in my own life? When had I stopped being Diana's husband and become just a person who happened to live in the same house? I stood in the guest room that Wednesday evening, looking at my belongings arranged in the smaller space, and felt the full weight of how gradually I'd been erased. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 11, I heard voices downstairs. Diana and Patricia talking in the kitchen. I moved quietly to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. You need to accelerate the timeline. Patricia's voice drifted up the staircase. Before he retires, before it's finalized, the lawyer said 6 more months minimum. But if Thomas starts asking questions, Diana's response was quieter, harder to hear. I caught fragments. He won't. Never pays attention, just needs to sign. Patricia cut her off. If he finds out before everything transfers, we lose the advantage. The Florida property needs to close next month. The accounts need to be separated before tax season. You need to stop hesitating. There was a long pause. Then Diana said something that made my blood go cold. He trusts me. He always has. That's not the problem. Then what is? Marcus. He started asking questions. He wanted to know why his father wasn't included in the discussions. I told him it was a surprise, but he's not stupid. Patricia made a dismissive sound. Marcus will understand eventually. This is about securing your future. Thomas was always meant to be temporary. They said my name like I was a liability to be managed, a problem to be solved. Not a husband of 22 years. Not the father of their grandson. Just an obstacle. The next day, I made an appointment with a financial advisor. Someone Diana didn't know. Someone who had no connection to her family's firm. I told him I just wanted to understand my retirement options. Get a clear picture where things stood. I brought copies of every document I'd found in storage. Stuart Anderson sat across from me in his modest office, reviewing page after page of my financial history. His expression grew more serious as he read. After 20 minutes of silence broken only by turning pages, he looked up at me. Mr. Wright, when did you authorize the conversion of your joint investment account to an individual account under your wife's name? I stared at him. I didn't. That's a joint account. He turned the document around, pointing to a signature line dated 14 months ago. My signature was there. I didn't remember signing it. And this reallocation of your retirement funds, redirecting 70% to a trust you're not listed as beneficiary on, did you approve this change? My hands felt cold. What trust? Stuart leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Mr. Wright, did you review any of these documents before signing them? Stuart spent another hour walking me through what he'd found. Some changes were legitimate, things we discussed years ago and I'd simply forgotten, but others required my explicit, informed consent, decisions that would fundamentally alter my financial security. Those decisions have been executed anyway, relying on my signatures on forms I'd been told were simple updates or routine paperwork. The good news, Stuart said carefully, is that nothing is irreversible yet. Some of these changes haven't been finalized. Some require additional steps that haven't been taken. But Mr. Wright, you need to understand something important. He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Some of these transactions needed your approval not just in signature, but in witnessed, documented understanding of what you were agreeing to. If you didn't have that understanding, if information was deliberately withheld, that changes the legal standing significantly. I watched him write, my mind racing. What should I do? Stuart looked at me seriously. That depends on what you want the outcome to be. But first, you need to stop signing anything. Second, you need documentation of your current awareness. And third, he paused, you need to decide if you want to stop this quietly or make it official. That Sunday, Diana's sister Veronica came for dinner with her husband. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. They discussed the Florida property, a beachfront condominium Patricia had apparently purchased as an investment that Diana would help manage. They talked about the timeline for moving furniture, for establishing residency, for transferring certain business interests to a new location. I sat at the head of my own dining room table, eating food I'd helped prepare, and listened to them plan a future where I was completely absent, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Thomas will need to stay here, of course, Patricia said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. He has his routines, his comfort zone. This kind of change would be difficult for him. Diana nodded sympathetically, as though I were a pet who couldn't handle travel. Veronica asked about Marcus, whether he'd joined them in Florida for college. Eventually, Diana said, once things are settled, once everything's properly arranged. I cut my chicken, chewed slowly, and said nothing. I stopped correcting their assumptions. Stopped trying to insert myself into conversations where I clearly wasn't wanted. They noticed, relaxing visibly when I didn't object or question. Good. Let them relax. I realized something important that week. My greatest advantage wasn't knowledge or resources or legal positioning. My greatest advantage was that Diana and Patricia didn't see me as a threat. They'd spent years treating me like someone who couldn't manage complex decisions, who needed things simplified, who preferred to let others handle important matters. They believed their own narrative. So I leaned into it. When Diana asked me to sign an update to our homeowner's insurance, I read it carefully in private first, confirmed with Stuart it was actually legitimate, then signed it without comment. When Patricia suggested I might want to update my will to make things easier for everyone, I agreed readily but said I needed time to find my old documents first. I never found them, of course. I was too busy updating my own estate documents with Stuart's recommended attorney, making everything clean, clear, and airtight. You're playing a dangerous game, Stuart warned during one of our meetings. If they realize you're aware, they won't, I said. They're too confident. They think I'm checked out, just coasting toward retirement, too comfortable to make waves. I paused, looking at the documents spread between us. Let them think that. Let them believe I'm agreeing to my own erasure. Stuart studied me carefully. What changed, Mr. Wright? I stopped being afraid. I said simply, the next month, I played my part perfectly. I agreed when Diana suggested I might want to scale back my hours at work, spend more time on hobbies. I nodded when Patricia recommended I focus on my health, maybe see a doctor about those headaches I'd been having. Headaches I'd never actually mentioned, but she seemed eager to establish I was having. I scheduled a medical checkup, mentioned it casually at dinner. Diana and Patricia exchanged a glance that made their assumptions crystal clear. They thought I was declining, becoming more dependent, less capable of managing my own affairs. Perfect. Meanwhile, I worked with Stuart's attorney to update my actual estate documents. Everything transparent, everything witnessed by neutral parties, everything designed to ensure my assets went exactly where I decided they should go. I established a trust for Marcus, completely separate from anything Diana controlled. I documented my full cognitive awareness with my doctor, who ran comprehensive tests and provided a written statement of my complete mental competency. I gathered evidence. Not dramatically, not obviously, just careful documentation of conversations, copies of documents, records of decisions made without my genuine consent. I built a case I hoped I'd never need, but prepared like I would. The whole time, I stayed quiet, agreeable, checked out, as far as they could tell. The attorney Stuart recommended was a sharp woman named Carolyn Foster, mid-50s, with 30 years of experience in family law and estate planning. She reviewed everything I brought her with the focus and intensity of someone who'd seen this kind of situation before. Mr. Wright, you need to understand what you're creating here, she said, pushing the finalized documents across her desk. This will revoke the previous version entirely. It establishes clear beneficiaries, clear asset distribution, and most importantly, clear documentation that you made these decisions with full awareness and legal capacity. She pointed to a specific clause we crafted carefully. This section addresses any claims that you were incompetent or unduly influenced. It specifically notes that you made these changes after becoming aware of information previously withheld from you. It doesn't name anyone, doesn't make accusations, but establishes your reasoning on record. I signed each page, feeling something settle in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. The witnesses are waiting in the conference room, Carolyn continued. 2 neutral parties who will sign affidavits, confirming you appeared of sound mind, acted of your own free will, and fully understood the implications of these documents. 20 minutes later, it was done. Signed, witnessed, notarized, filed. One clause, buried in the legal language, changed everything. If my wife attempted to claim assets through documents I'd signed without full disclosure, this will establish my explicit revocation of any such arrangements. Marcus came to me on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after that kitchen confrontation. He found me in the garage, organizing tools I didn't really need to organize. Dad, can we talk? He sat on my workbench, looking uncomfortable. I've been thinking about the Florida thing, about how you weren't included in those conversations. So I looked at some stuff. I asked Mom about the trust fund Grandma set up for my college. I stopped organizing, giving him my full attention, and I'm not listed as a beneficiary anymore. Mom is, with a provision that she'll use it for my education, but she controls it now. When I asked her why, she said it was for tax purposes that you and she decided together. He looked at me directly. Dad, did you know about that change? I could have lied, could have protected Diana, smoothed it over, kept Marcus out of conflict I saw coming. Instead, I told him the truth. No, son, I didn't know about that change. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's what I thought. Because when I asked when you guys discussed it, Mom gave me 3 different dates, and none of them matched what Grandma said. He slid off the workbench. I'm going to talk to them. Marcus, wait. No, Dad, this is wrong. I'm not 10. I understand what's happening. I wasn't there when Marcus confronted his mother and grandmother, but I heard the aftermath. Raised voices from the living room. Marcus demanding explanations, Diana trying to calm him down, Patricia's sharp interjections cutting through it all. When Marcus finally emerged, his face was red with frustration. He grabbed his car keys without looking at me and left. Diana found me in the kitchen 10 minutes later. You put him up to that, she said, her voice tight with anger. You told him things that aren't his concern. I answered a direct question honestly. Should I have lied? You should have let me handle it. He's confused now, asking questions that are more complicated than he understands. I looked at my wife, really looked at her. When had the woman I married become someone who thought our son shouldn't ask questions about his own future? Maybe the problem isn't the questions, Diana. Maybe it's the answers. She left without responding. That night, I heard her on the phone with Patricia. Their voices were urgent, worried. The timeline accelerated after that. Within a week, Diana told me the Florida move was happening sooner than expected. They needed to close on the property by month's end. Patricia would be moving next week to handle arrangements. Diana would follow shortly after with the furniture and personal items. What about me? I asked. She looked at me like I'd asked something absurd. You'll stay here, Thomas. This house is your home. The movers were scheduled for the 15th. Diana coordinated everything with military precision, boxing up furniture, artwork, personal items I'd assumed were ours, but apparently weren't. She worked around me, literally stepping over boxes in hallways, acting like I was an obstacle to navigate rather than a person who might have opinions about household belongings disappearing. Patricia had already left for Florida 3 days earlier. Diana planned to follow right after the movers finished loading. I watched the activity from my home office, the small room I retreated to years ago when I thought I was giving Diana space, but was actually being systematically isolated. Stewart called Tuesday morning. Mr. Wright, I've reviewed the property documents your wife filed for the Florida purchase. There's a problem with the closing. What kind of problem? The down payment came from your joint investment account, the one that was supposedly converted to her individual account. But that conversion was never properly finalized because it required additional verification steps that weren't completed. The funds legally still require your approval for major transactions. I felt something click into place. So the purchase can't close without my signature? Not legally, not without potential fraud liability. The title company is going to require confirmation. I thought about the movers coming in 3 days, about Diana's confidence this would all proceed smoothly, about Patricia's certainty that I'd be left behind, properly managed. Let them proceed, I said quietly. Stewart was silent for a moment. Mr. Wright, let them think everything's fine. Let them load the movers. Let them get right to the moment when they need that final signature. Then we'll see what happens. Friday morning arrived with boxes stacked in every room. Diana moved through our home like a general preparing for deployment, checking lists, directing the movers who'd arrived at 8. I stayed in my office, reading, occasionally glancing out the window at the truck being loaded with our life. Around noon, Diana knocked on my door. Thomas, the title company needs a signature. Final authorization for the property transfer. It's just a formality. She slid a document across my desk. I picked it up, read it carefully. It was exactly what Stewart had described. A form requiring my explicit approval for the transaction, since the funds came from our joint account. My signature would make everything legal. Without it, the entire purchase fell apart. Diana, can I ask you something? She checked her watch impatiently. The notary is waiting. Why wasn't I included in any of this? The planning, the decisions, the conversations about our future? She sighed, the exasperation clear. Thomas, we've been over this. You've never been interested in these details. You prefer to let me handle things. That's how we've always worked. Is it? Or is that just what became convenient to believe? Diana's expression hardened. Just sign the paper, Thomas. I set it down and signed. I need to think about it. There's nothing to think about. This needs to be filed today. The movers are loading our furniture right now. Everything's already in motion. I met her eyes steadily. Then maybe someone should have asked my permission before setting things in motion. That evening, Marcus arrived unexpectedly with his girlfriend Sophie. Diana had organized a small gathering, supposedly to celebrate the new chapter before she left for Florida. Her sister Veronica came, along with 2 of Diana's close friends. Patricia joined via video call from Florida, her face filling the tablet screen Diana propped on the dining room table. Everyone gathered in our living room, now half empty of furniture, looking strange and hollow. Diana presented the Florida plan like an exciting adventure, describing the beachfront property, the investment opportunities, the lifestyle change. People nodded politely. Then Patricia's voice came through the tablet speaker. Diana has worked so hard coordinating this transition. Everything's been handled perfectly. All the legal arrangements, all the financial transfers. Thomas has been wonderfully supportive throughout the process. I stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of water, listening to my life being rewritten in real time. Marcus watched me, then looked at the tablet screen where his grandmother smiled confidently. Actually, I said quietly, and the room went silent. I have a question. Diana turned toward me, warning in her eyes. Thomas, not now. Why am I not listed on the property deed? The room's temperature seemed to drop. What? Diana's voice was sharp. I pulled out my phone, displaying the document I'd photographed earlier. The Florida property. It lists you and your mother as co-owners. My name isn't anywhere on the documentation. Why is that? Patricia's face on the screen shifted into calculation mode. Veronica suddenly found her drink fascinating. Marcus leaned forward, interested. It's a complicated financial structure, Diana started. For tax purposes, I'd like to understand those purposes, I interrupted gently. Since apparently my joint investment funds help purchase a property I don't own. The next 20 minutes were remarkable. Diana tried to explain complex financial arrangements that sounded increasingly hollow as I asked simple, direct questions. Patricia attempted to take control of the conversation from Florida, but I politely talked over her, something I'd never done before. The more they tried to justify decisions made without my knowledge, the more the whole structure revealed itself. Veronica excused herself quickly. Diana's friends followed, suddenly remembering other commitments. Marcus and Sophie stayed, witnessing the collapse. You need to sign the authorization. Patricia's voice came to the tablet, stripped of its earlier confidence. The closing is scheduled for Monday. The movers have our furniture. This is already done, Thomas. No, I said calmly. It's not done. It can't be done without my legal approval. And I'm not giving it. Diana's face went white. You can't do this. Everything's arranged. The deposit, the movers, the timeline, all arranged without consulting me. All decided without my input. All planned around the assumption I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. I set my water glass down on the mantel. I care, Diana. And I notice. Patricia's voice turned sharp. You're being vindictive. This is about our family's future security. No, I said. This is about my family planning a future that specifically excluded me, using my money to do it. That's not security. That's theft. The room erupted. Diana shouted that I was sabotaging everything out of spite. Patricia demanded I consider Marcus's future, as though draining my finances was somehow for our son's benefit. But I didn't raise my voice, didn't lose control. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I knew exactly what I want to say. I'm not contesting anything out of anger, I said when they finally stopped yelling. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I'm simply clarifying what belongs to me and what doesn't. You plan a life in Florida? Fine. Go to Florida. But not with my money. Not with assets you took without my informed consent. Diana stared at me like I was a stranger. Who are you? I'm the person you forgot to respect. I replied. The person you assumed would never stand up for himself. You were wrong about that. I pulled out documents from my briefcase, copies of everything Stuart and Carolyn had helped me prepare. These outline what I control, what requires my approval, and what was changed without proper authorization. You'll notice several transactions that need to be reversed or legally challenged. Your attorney can review them. I set them on the coffee table. I'm willing to separate everything fairly, cleanly, on record, with full transparency about what we each contributed and what we each deserve. But the assumption that you could just take what you wanted and leave me with what you decided I needed, that's over. The following week was chaos. Diana consulted with attorneys who confirmed what Stuart had told me, that several of the financial transactions required my knowing consent, not just my signature on forms I've been told were routine updates. The Florida property purchase couldn't proceed without additional funds. Funds Diana and Patricia didn't have access to without my approval. The furniture sat in storage because the delivery couldn't be completed to a property that wasn't legally owned yet. The timeline Patricia had orchestrated so carefully collapsed like a house of cards. They discovered I controlled more than they'd assumed. The retirement accounts they'd redirected still require my authorization for final distribution. The investment accounts they planned to transfer had reversal clauses I'd never invoked before. The trust they'd established for Marcus that somehow didn't benefit Marcus, that I could challenge legally based on misrepresentation. Everything they'd built their plan on turned out to rest on my continued cooperation. Cooperation they'd stopped earning years ago. Tuesday afternoon, Diana received the assessment from her attorney. Without my agreement, the Florida plan was impossible. With a legal challenge based on the documents I'd provided, they could face serious complications. Patricia called me directly, her voice cold with fury. You're destroying your own family. No, I said. I'm protecting myself from people who stopped treating me like family a long time ago. Thursday evening, Diana came to the guest room where I'd been sleeping for months. She knocked softly, waited for me to open the door. She looked exhausted. Nothing like the confident woman who'd been coordinating her escape 3 weeks earlier. Thomas, can we talk? Really talk. I let her in. We sat in the small room, surrounded by my exile, and she tried to make it right. I never meant for things to go this far, she started. Mother convinced me you'd be happier this way, that you didn't really want to be involved in these decisions. Did you believe that, or was it just easier? She looked away. Both, maybe. You seemed so checked out, Thomas. You stopped fighting for space in our life. You let me make decisions without pushing back. I thought that meant you didn't care. I cared. I just got tired of having to fight to be heard in my own marriage. Patricia tried a different approach, calling Friday morning with threats disguised as concerns. You're humiliating Diana publicly. People are asking questions about the Florida situation. You're making our family look dysfunctional. I'm making our family's dysfunction visible. I corrected. That's different. For the first time in 22 years, they needed me. Not my signature, not my compliance, but my actual agreement, my willing participation in whatever came next. And I had the power to say no. I moved out on a Saturday morning in late spring. Not because Diana forced me out, but because I chose to leave. I'd found a decent apartment across town, 2 bedrooms, good light, close to where Marcus lived. The movers I hired were efficient and respectful, treating my belongings like they mattered. Diana watched from the porch as I loaded boxes into my truck. Patricia had returned from Florida, her dream property plan abandoned, and stood next to her daughter wearing an expression of pure fury. Neither of them spoke to me. Marcus helped me carry furniture, chatting about normal things like his upcoming semester and Sophie's new job. He'd chosen not to pick sides, but he'd made clear where his respect landed. "You doing okay, Dad?" he asked as we loaded my desk. "Yeah, son, I'm doing okay." The guest room emptied quickly. I hadn't accumulated much in my exile, hadn't spread out or claimed space. It made leaving easier. As I drove away from the house I'd lived in for 18 years, I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger, relief. I was reclaiming space, not as a cast-off, but as a person who deserved better than what I'd been accepting. One final meeting remained, scheduled for the following Wednesday. Mediation to formally separate our lives. The mediation took place in a conference room downtown, neutral territory, with professional mediator named Kenneth Stone. Diana arrived with her attorney. I arrived with Carolyn Foster. We sat across from each other at a long table, and Kenneth walked through the process. Every decision I'd made quietly over the past months paid off. The documents I prepared established clear ownership of my assets. The evidence I'd gathered proved which signatures had been given with full knowledge and which had been obtained through misrepresentation. The financial record Stewart compiled showed exactly how much I contributed to our life together and what I was entitled to receive. Diana's attorney tried to argue for more favorable terms, but Carolyn calmly presented documentation that made their position untenable. No shouting, no dramatic accusations, just facts laid out methodically, impossible to dispute. The retirement accounts would be split fairly based on contribution, not on Patricia's creative redistribution. The investment accounts will be divided according to actual deposits, not assumed future use. The house would be sold and proceeds split after accounting for my higher initial investment. Marcus's trust would be restructured to actually benefit Marcus, with neutral trustees preventing either parent from misusing funds. By the end of the day, Kenneth had outlined a settlement both attorneys agreed was equitable based on the evidence. Diana signed reluctantly. I signed with steady hands. The final ruling came through 6 weeks later. Everything we'd agreed to in mediation became official. Diana received her fair share of our marital assets, but nothing close to what she and Patricia had planned to take. The Florida property dream died completely. The deposit loss of their failed timeline. Patricia's influence over Diana's finances ended with the restructured oversight. She returned to her own home in Arizona, bitter and defeated. Diana stayed in our house temporarily while it went on the market, living in the space we'd shared, surrounded by the gaps where my belongings used to be. She called me once after the settlement finalized. "I'm sorry, Thomas, for all of it. I know. Do you forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time. I don't know yet. Maybe someday. But right now I just need distance. The house sold quickly. Diana moved to a smaller place across town. We maintained polite contact for Marcus's sake, but the easy familiarity we'd once shared was gone, replaced by careful formality. Marcus thrived at school, secure in his properly managed trust fund, relieved the legal drama had ended. He had dinner with me every Sunday, slowly rebuilding the relationship that had suffered during years of my quiet acceptance. I settled into my apartment, then later into a small house I purchased myself. My name only. My choice. 18 months after everything fell apart, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner. Just a small gathering, Marcus and Sophie, two friends from work, my brother who flew in from Seattle. We ate food I prepared in my kitchen, sitting around a table I'd chosen, in a home that was entirely mine. The conversation flowed easily. People laughed. Marcus told stories about his internship. Sophie talked about her graduate program. My brother caught me up on his kids. No one walking on eggshells. No one dismissing my contributions. No one planning futures that excluded me from my own life. My phone buzzed during dessert. A text from Diana. Marcus said you're hosting today. I hope it's going well. I was wondering if we could talk sometime soon. There are some things I'd like to explain, make right if possible. I read the message, set my phone down, and returned to my guests. Later that night, after everyone left and I was cleaning up, I looked at the text again. She wanted to talk, wanted to explain, wanted something from me I no longer owed. I deleted the message. Then I poured myself a drink, sat on my porch, and looked at the stars. They'd planned a life without me. Planned to use my resources, my compliance, my willingness to be managed. Planned to leave me behind like I was excess weight. Instead, I built something better. Something honest. Something mine. The last laugh wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was quiet and satisfied. They'd underestimated the man they thought would never stand up. I proved them wrong, not through anger or revenge, but through simple self-respect. And that felt like the best ending possible.